The summer of 1947 in Hollow Creek, Kentucky, was one of those seasons that seemed to stretch on endlessly, as if time itself had slowed under the weight of the relentless heat. The air hung heavy with humidity, thick and oppressive, carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle mixed with the earthy aroma of sun-baked soil. The Appalachian foothills, usually a verdant haven, felt like a furnace, the ancient oak trees standing as silent sentinels, their leaves drooping in surrender. The Caldwell family had always kept to themselves, their sprawling farmhouse nestled at the end of a winding dirt road, almost entirely obscured by those towering oaks that seemed to guard the property like loyal watchmen. Locals in Hollow Creek rarely ventured near, and those who did spoke in hushed tones about the strange happenings at the Caldwell property. Whispers of lights in windows at odd hours, of figures that didn't seem to age, of a family that had been there longer than anyone could remember. It was into this isolated world that Thomas Reed arrived, a young journalist fresh out of college, his ambition burning brighter than the Kentucky sun. At 22, Thomas was eager to make his mark at the Louisville Courier-Journal, where he'd landed a junior position after impressing his professors with sharp writing and an insatiable curiosity. He had heard the whispers about the Caldwells while covering a story on coal mining disputes in eastern Kentucky, the kind of assignment that took him deep into the hills, talking to weathered miners with stories etched into their faces. Rumors swirled like smoke from a pipe. A family that hadn't aged in decades, children who remained children for far too long, a patriarch who should have been long dead but still tended his fields with the vigor of a man half his age. Most dismissed these tales as backwoods superstition, the folklore that flourished in isolated mountain communities where boredom bred imagination. But Thomas Reed was different. He saw a story, perhaps the story that would launch his career from small-town reporter to national name. The dashboard clock of Thomas's 1939 Ford Coupe read 4:17 p.m. as he turned onto the dirt road leading to the Caldwell farm, the tires crunching over gravel that kicked up dust in his wake. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows across the windshield, the light playing tricks on his eyes as if the road itself were alive. The radio, tuned to a local station, faded to static as he ventured deeper into the hollow, Perry Como's smooth voice eventually disappearing beneath the crackle of interference. Thomas switched off the radio with a flick of his wrist, rolling down his window to let in the air, thick with humidity and the heady scent of honeysuckle that clung to the roadside vines. Cicadas droned in the trees, their rhythmic buzzing the only sound apart from the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional clink of his camera equipment shifting in the passenger seat. The heat pressed against his skin, a constant companion that made his shirt stick to his back, but his mind was focused, his notepad resting on the seat beside him, ready for whatever lay ahead. As the road curved sharply to the right, the Caldwell farmhouse came into view, rising from the landscape like a relic from another era. Thomas slowed the car to a crawl, taking in the sight before him, his journalist's instinct already cataloging details. The two-story structure was well-maintained but clearly old, its white paint yellowed with age, the wide porch wrapping around the front like an embrace. Rocking chairs sat empty, swaying slightly in the breeze, and hanging plants dangled from hooks, their leaves vibrant against the faded facade. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, an odd sight in the summer heat, as if the house defied the season. What caught Thomas's attention most, however, was the family gathered on the porch. From a distance, they appeared perfectly ordinary. A man and woman, perhaps in their 40s, and 3 children of varying ages. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in overalls and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his stance exuding quiet strength. The woman wore a floral print dress, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her posture graceful yet watchful. The children, 2 boys and a girl, were playing some kind of game that involved jumping between the porch steps, their laughter faint on the wind. Thomas parked his car beneath one of the oak trees, the shade a brief respite from the sun, and retrieved his notepad and camera from the passenger seat. The strap of the camera felt heavy around his neck, a tool of his trade that had captured countless stories, but this one felt different, weighted with potential. As he approached the house, the family ceased their activities and turned to watch him, their expressions unreadable from afar, the cicadas seeming to grow louder in the sudden stillness. The air hummed with tension, the scent of honeysuckle now overpowering, as if the land itself were holding its breath. "Afternoon," Thomas called out, raising a hand in greeting as he reached the bottom of the porch steps. His voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "Name's Thomas Reed from the Louisville Courier-Journal." The man on the porch nodded slowly but didn't speak, his weathered face a map of lines that spoke of years under the sun. Up close, Thomas could see that he was older than he'd initially appeared, perhaps in his late 50s rather than 40s, with deep lines around his eyes and salt and pepper hair that caught the light. There was something strange about those eyes, Thomas thought, a depth that held knowledge far beyond the man's apparent years, as if they had witnessed centuries rather than decades. The woman, presumably Mrs. Caldwell, stepped forward, her floral dress swaying slightly in the breeze, her high cheekbones and clear, intelligent eyes giving her a timeless beauty. "We don't much care for having our business in the papers," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heated. Especially not when reporters come with stories already half-written in their heads. Thomas felt a flush creep up his neck, the heat of the day suddenly secondary to the discomfort of her words. "Ma'am, I assure you," he began, but she interrupted, her gaze steady and unflinching. "You've heard things about us," she said, her tone making it clear she knew exactly why he was there. "That's why you're here, not for some article about farming." The children had stopped playing entirely now and stood clustered behind their parents, the oldest boy staring at Thomas with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. The younger boy and the little girl, perhaps 8 and 6 respectively, whispered to each other behind cupped hands, their eyes wide with curiosity. Joseph Caldwell, the man on the porch, sighed heavily, his broad shoulders rising and falling with the breath. "Eleanor," he said to his wife, his voice deep and resonant, "perhaps we should hear the man out." He turned to Thomas, his gaze appraising. "You might as well come inside, Mr. Reed. Seems like we have things to discuss." Thomas followed the family into the farmhouse, the screen door creaking shut behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down his spine. The interior was cooler than outside, but still warm, the hardwood floors gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through lace-curtain windows. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted. A large oak dining table with matching chairs, a sideboard laden with blue and white china, a grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the corner, its pendulum swinging with rhythmic precision. Eleanor Caldwell gestured for Thomas to sit at the table, her movements graceful yet deliberate, while she moved to the stove where a kettle was beginning to whistle, the steam rising in lazy curls. "Tea, Mr. Reed?" she asked, her tone making refusal seem impolite. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you," Thomas replied, settling into the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He set his notepad on the table but left his camera strap looped around his neck, the familiar weight a comfort. He noticed the children hovering in the doorway, watching him with undisguised curiosity, their small faces framed by the light from the kitchen window. "And who might you three be?" he asked, attempting to break the tension with a smile. The oldest boy stepped forward, his shoulders squared with a maturity that belied his apparent age. "I'm Samuel," he said, his voice steady. "This is my brother James and my sister Margaret." The younger children nodded in acknowledgement but remained silent, their eyes fixed on Thomas with an unnerving focus. Joseph Caldwell took a seat across from Thomas, folding his weathered hands on the tabletop, the skin roughened by years of labor. "Now then, Mr. Reed, why don't you tell us what you've heard about our family that's brought you all the way out here to Hollow Creek?" Thomas cleared his throat, the teacup clinking softly as Eleanor placed it before him. The liquid was scalding hot and bitter, a stark contrast to the sweetness of the honeysuckle outside. "Well, sir, there's talk in town about the Caldwells. They say you've been here longer than anyone can remember, but you never seem to change." Eleanor took a seat beside her husband, her posture rigid, her clear eyes fixed on Thomas with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "People talk," Joseph said simply, his tone matter-of-fact, "especially in small towns where there's little else to do. Then there's no truth to it," Thomas pressed, his journalist's instincts sharpening, the notepad forgotten as he leaned forward. Because I've spoken to folks who claim their grandparents knew your family, and they say you looked exactly the same then as you do now. Joseph and Eleanor exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke volumes, the grandfather clock ticking loudly in the silence that followed. What if there was some truth to what you've heard? Joseph said finally, his voice steady. What would you do with that information, Mr. Reed? Thomas leaned forward eagerly, the tea forgotten as it cooled in his cup. I'd write about it, of course. Could be the medical discovery of the century. Think of the implications if whatever affects your family could be studied, understood. Eleanor's expression hardened, her hands tightening around her own teacup. Studied? Like specimens in a laboratory? No, that's not what Thomas began, but she interrupted, her voice cold. It's exactly what you mean. You'd have doctors and scientists descending on our home, disrupting our lives, treating us like curiosities rather than people. Thomas stared at him, momentarily speechless. If what Caldwell was saying was true, and despite the fantastical nature of the tale, he was inclined to believe the man. He was sitting across from someone who had lived through the Civil War, who had been an adult when Abraham Lincoln was president. My father was a good doctor, Joseph continued, but he was also a scientist at heart, always experimenting, always searching for ways to improve human life. He became obsessed with the idea of extending life, of conquering death itself. He paused, his gaze distant, as if reliving memories long buried. In 1857, he believed he'd found something, a combination of local plants and minerals that, when processed a certain way, created what he called the elixir. Eleanor returned to the table, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder, her touch gentle yet supportive. Joseph, are you certain about this? He covered her hand with his own, the gesture intimate and reassuring. He needs to understand, Eleanor. It's the only way. She nodded reluctantly and sat down again, her posture straight as she watched Thomas with wary eyes. My father tested the elixir on himself first, Joseph said. When he showed no ill effects, he gave it to my mother, to me, and to my younger sister, Rebecca. We didn't notice anything unusual at first. But as the years passed, it became clear that something had changed within us. By 1870, when I should have been showing signs of aging, I still looked like a man of 28. My father appeared no older than he had the day he first took the elixir. And you haven't aged since? Thomas asked, struggling to accept what he was hearing, his mind racing with the implications. We age, Eleanor corrected, her voice soft but firm. But very, very slowly, perhaps 1 year for every 15 or 20 that pass. Eleanor came to us in 1889, Joseph explained. She was the local school teacher, new to the area. We fell in love, and eventually I trusted her with our secret. She chose to take the elixir as well. And your children? Thomas asked, his gaze shifting to the doorway where the children had hovered. Joseph and Eleanor exchanged another look, a silent communication that carried the weight of years. They were born as normal children, Eleanor said carefully, but they inherited the effects. They age normally until around 12 years old, and then it slows dramatically. So, how old are they really? Thomas couldn't help asking, his curiosity overriding his manners. Samuel was born in 1901, Joseph said. He's 46. James is 72. And Margaret? He paused, a shadow crossing his face. Margaret is our youngest, born in 1926. She's the only one who appears close to her actual age. Thomas's mind reeled with questions, the grandfather clocks ticking seeming louder in the silence. But how have you kept this secret for so long? Surely people would notice that you don't age. We move, Eleanor explained, her voice carrying a note of weariness. Every 20 years or so, we sell the property, change our names, and relocate to another isolated area. Then, after a generation has passed, we sometimes circle back. Human memory is short, Mr. Reed. Few people live in the same place their entire lives anymore. Those who do are often willing to dismiss what they see as impossible. But you said your father discovered this in 1857, Thomas pressed. That's 90 years ago. Why hasn't he published his findings? Why keep something so monumental a secret? Joseph's expression darkened, his hands clenching slightly on the table. My father did try to share his discovery once. In 1863, during the Civil War, he approached the Union Army, believing the elixir might help save wounded soldiers. He was naive. They didn't see a medical miracle. They saw a military advantage. They seized his notes, detained him for questioning, tried to force him to produce more elixir. What happened? He escaped, Joseph said simply, returned home and destroyed all written record of his work. He vowed never to share the formula again and made us promise the same. Where is he now? Your father? Dead? Eleanor answered before Joseph could speak. Some things the elixir cannot prevent. Disease still affects us. Jeremiah Caldwell died of tuberculosis in 1892. Thomas sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by what he was hearing. If it was true, and despite the fantastical nature of the tale, he was inclined to believe the Caldwells, he was sitting on the biggest story of the century, perhaps the biggest story ever. Mr. Reed, Joseph said, reading his thoughts. You gave me your word that this conversation would remain private. But Mr. Caldwell, surely you see the potential benefit to mankind. If doctors could study your condition, replicate the elixir. No, Joseph's tone was final. I've seen what men do with power, Mr. Reed. I lived through the Civil War. I saw the trenches of France in the Great War. I watched as man split the atom and unleashed hell on earth in Japan just 2 years ago. Imagine what they would do with the power to extend life indefinitely. Not everyone would misuse it, Thomas argued. Think of the diseases that could be cured, the suffering that could be prevented. And think of the suffering that could be caused, Eleanor countered. A world where only the wealthy and powerful live for centuries while the rest age and die as nature intended. A world of increasing inequality, of resources strained beyond capacity by populations that never diminish. Thomas had no immediate response to that. The ethical implications were indeed staggering. There's more, Joseph said quietly. The elixir comes with a price. We may not age, but we still feel the passage of time. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch everyone you know grow old and die, generation after generation? To form friendships, knowing they're fleeting from your perspective? To live in constant fear of discovery? It's a lonely existence, Mr. Reed, Eleanor added softly. One I would not wish on others. The sound of children's laughter drifted in through the open window. The Caldwell children returning from their chores. They fell silent when they saw the vial on the table. Pa, Samuel said, his voice sharp with concern. It's all right, son, Joseph assured him. Mr. Reed and I are just having a discussion about choices and consequences. Samuel's gaze shifted to Thomas, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Despite his youthful appearance, there was something ancient in that gaze, something that had seen far more than a 12-year-old boy should have seen. Thomas picked up the vial, rolling it between his fingers. The glass was warm to the touch, as if the liquid inside generated its own heat. If I take this, he said slowly, how soon would I notice effects? The prevention of aging is gradual, Joseph explained. You wouldn't notice anything immediately, but the other effect is instantaneous. What other effect? Clarity, Eleanor said. A heightened awareness of time's passage. My father-in-law called it the long view, the ability to see beyond the immediate moment, to perceive the broader sweep of history. It sounded almost mystical, but Thomas was too captivated by the possibility to dismiss it. And there are no side effects, no drawbacks besides the emotional toll you mentioned? We can still be killed, Joseph said bluntly. Disease, injury, they affect us as they would anyone else. The elixir preserves youth. It doesn't grant invulnerability. Thomas uncorked the vial, the faint scent of herbs and something metallic reaching his nostrils. He had come to Hollow Creek looking for a story and found something far more profound, a moral quandary disguised as a miracle. If he drank the elixir, he would be binding himself to secrecy more effectively than any promise could. If he refused, he would be walking away from the story of a lifetime. I need to think, he said, recorking the vial and slipping it into his pocket. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Joseph nodded. A wise choice, Mr. Reed. Few in your position would hesitate. You'll stay for supper, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. It's nearly ready and you've come a long way. Thomas glanced at his watch. surprised to find that it was already past 6 o'clock. The conversation had lasted longer than he'd realized. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. That's very kind." The meal that followed was surreal in its normality. Eleanor served fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. A typical Kentucky supper, the aromas filling the kitchen with a comforting warmth. The children, despite their actual ages, behaved like the children they appeared to be, bickering over the last piece of chicken and asking to be excused to play before dark. Joseph spoke of the farm, of the tobacco crop, and the price of feed, as if he were any other farmer rather than a century-old man who had witnessed the transformation of America from an agricultural society to an industrial superpower. As twilight deepened outside the windows, Thomas found himself relaxing despite the weight of the vial in his pocket. There was something peaceful about the Caldwell home, something that transcended the incredible secret it contained. After dinner, Joseph invited Thomas onto the porch for a smoke. The night air was cooler now, a welcome relief from the day's heat. Fireflies blinked in the yard, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. It sung a melancholy note in the darkness. "My father planted those oak trees," Joseph said, gesturing with his pipe toward the massive trees that lined the drive. "They were saplings when I was a boy. Now look at them." Thomas tried to imagine watching trees grow from saplings to giants, living long enough to see forests mature and landscapes transform. "It must be strange," he said, "watching the world change while you remain the same." Joseph chuckled softly. "Oh, we change, Mr. Reed. Not physically, perhaps, but in here." He tapped his temple with the stem of his pipe. "The mind continues to grow, to adapt. You either evolve with the times or you become a relic regardless of how young you look." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light from inside. "Leaving so soon? It's getting dark. You're welcome to stay the night." "Thank you, but I should get back," Thomas replied. "My editor is expecting me tomorrow." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her concern. "Be careful on those mountain roads after dark. And Mr. Reed," she hesitated. "Remember that knowledge once shared cannot be reclaimed." The children appeared behind her, lining up to say goodbye with a formality that seemed at odds with their youthful appearances. "Will you come back, Mr. Reed?" Margaret asked, her voice small but clear. Thomas smiled at her, wondering how it felt to be a 21-year-old woman trapped in the body of a 6-year-old girl. "Perhaps I will, Margaret. Would you like that?" She nodded solemnly. "I would. We don't get many visitors." "Then I'll do my best," he promised, though he wasn't sure if it was a promise he could keep. As Thomas drove away from the Caldwell farm, the headlights of his Ford cutting through the darkness, he found himself looking at the world with new eyes. The vial sat on the passenger seat beside him, its contents gleaming faintly in the dashboard light. The elixir, the key to extended youth, possibly even a form of immortality. The ethical dilemma it presented was staggering. If he wrote his story, exposed the Caldwell secret to the world, he would be opening a Pandora's box that could never be closed again. Governments would fight for control of the elixir. The wealthy would hoard it. Society itself might fracture along new lines, the ageless versus the mortal. Yet to keep such knowledge hidden seemed equally wrong. What of the countless lives that might be improved or extended? What of the suffering that might be prevented? By the time Thomas reached the main road, his decision was made. He pulled over, cut the engine, and sat in the darkness for a long moment, the cicada's song filling the night air. Then he uncorked the vial. The liquid inside was bitter, with an aftertaste of something he couldn't identify, something ancient and earthy. He drank it all in one swallow, then sat waiting, wondering if he would feel any different. First, there was nothing. Then, gradually, a strange clarity seemed to settle over his thoughts. It wasn't a physical sensation so much as a shift in perspective. The pressing concerns that had occupied his mind, his career, his reputation, the story he had come to find, suddenly seemed small and fleeting against the vast backdrop of time. Thomas started the car again and continued toward Louisville, his mind racing with possibilities. He would not write the story, not as he had intended, at least. The risk to the Caldwells was too great, and the potential consequences for humanity too unpredictable. But perhaps there was another way to share this discovery, to explore its implications without exposing the Caldwell family. Perhaps with time, and time was now a resource he would have in abundance, he could find a middle path between secrecy and revelation. It would be a delicate balance, a task that might take decades or even centuries to complete. But then, for the first time in his life, Thomas Reed had all the time in the world. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Dr. Martin Hargrove of the University of Kentucky Medical School received a peculiar package. The brown paper wrapping crinkled under his fingers as he opened it, revealing a journal filled with notes on theoretical life extension, cellular regeneration, and aging prevention, all presented as hypothetical rather than proven science. There was no return address, only a note that read, "For when humanity is ready, not yet, but someday." Dr. Hargrove scanned the journal with initial skepticism that quickly gave way to fascination. The theories presented were revolutionary, decades ahead of current medical understanding. Yet, they were incomplete, tantalizingly close to a breakthrough but missing key components that would make practical application possible. He spent weeks studying the journal, his office filled with the scent of coffee and old books, the late-night hours blending into one another as he scribbled notes in the margins. Eventually, he brought it to the attention of colleagues, their discussions a buzz of excitement in the sterile halls of the medical school. Soon, a small team had formed to investigate the theories, publishing papers that would lay the groundwork for entirely new fields of medical research. None of them ever discovered the journal's source, though some noted the Louisville postmark, nor did they connect it to the young journalist Thomas Reed, who had abruptly resigned from the Courier-Journal that same autumn, citing a desire to explore broader horizons. Reed himself had vanished from Kentucky, leaving no forwarding address. Rumors suggested he had moved west, perhaps to California or Oregon. A few people claimed to have seen him years later, looking remarkably youthful for his age, but such sightings were dismissed as cases of mistaken identity. In Hollow Creek, the Caldwell family continued their quiet existence, tending their farm and keeping to themselves. Occasionally, a package would arrive from distant cities, books for the children, seeds for Joseph's garden, fabric for Eleanor's sewing. There was never a letter enclosed, never a return address, but they knew who sent them. And sometimes, on still summer nights when the fireflies danced in the yard and the whippoor called from the trees, Joseph Caldwell would sit on his porch and raise his pipe in silent salute to the journalist who had kept his word. The years passed. Decades turned to generations. The world changed around the Caldwell farm, but the family remained constant, moving occasionally as suspicions arose, always returning when memories had faded. Medical science advanced, spurred in part by the mysterious journal that had appeared in 1947. By the early 21st century, researchers had extended human lifespan significantly, though true agelessness remained elusive, the key components missing from the journal's formulas continuing to baffle the scientific community. And in a small coastal town in Oregon, a man who appeared to be in his early 30s operated an antiquarian bookshop. He lived simply but comfortably, his shelves filled with first editions and historical texts spanning centuries. Locals knew him as a reclusive scholar with an uncanny knowledge of history, someone who spoke about past events as if he had witnessed them personally. Few noticed that he never seemed to age, that decade after decade, his face remained unmarked by time. Those who did notice eventually died or moved away, their observations dismissed as impossible. The bookseller kept meticulous journals, recording the sweep of history as he witnessed it. And every few years, he would distill his observations into anonymous papers submitted to medical and scientific journals around the world. Papers that nudged humanity closer to understanding aging without quite revealing the final secret. It was a delicate balance, this dance between revelation and concealment. But Thomas Reed had learned patience from the Caldwells. He could wait until humanity was ready for the gift and burden of extended life. And in the meantime, he watched and wrote, and remembered the family in Hollow Creek who had trusted a young journalist with the secret of the ages. The mystery of the Caldwell family and their apparent agelessness persisted as local folklore in eastern Kentucky. Occasionally, ambitious reporters or curious scientists would venture into Hollow Creek, seeking the family that time forgot. but they found only abandoned farmhouses and suspicious locals who claimed no knowledge of any Caldwells. The truth remained hidden in plain sight, influencing the course of medical science without ever revealing itself completely. A mystery wrapped in the pages of history, waiting for the day when humanity would be wise enough to turn the final page. In the summer of 1967, a young scientist named Dr. Elizabeth Chen discovered a curious pattern in the medical literature of the previous 20 years. Anonymous papers submitted from various locations across the country, all advancing similar theories about cellular regeneration and telomere preservation. The writing styles varied, but the underlying concepts connected like pieces of a puzzle with critical pieces still missing. Intrigued, Dr. Chun began tracking the papers, creating a map of submission locations and publication dates. The pattern suggested a single author moving systematically around the country, releasing information in carefully measured doses. Her investigation led her to a small town in Kentucky, where locals still told stories about the Caldwell family, the family that never aged. Most dismissed these tales as superstition, but Dr. Chun, with her scientific mind, saw the potential connection to the anonymous papers. After weeks of research, she located what she believed to be the original Caldwell property, now abandoned and overgrown, the farmhouse collapsing under decades of neglect. In the ruins of what had once been a doctor's office, beneath rotting floorboards, she found a metal box containing fragmented notes in faded ink. The handwriting matched none of the anonymous papers she had studied, but the concepts were undeniably related. The notes were signed J. Caldwell, MD, and dated 1857. Dr. Chun published her findings in a small medical journal, speculating about the connection between the 19th century doctor and the modern anonymous submissions. She suggested that someone had rediscovered Caldwell's work and was systematically releasing it to the scientific community. The paper attracted little attention at first. Then government officials arrived at her laboratory, confiscating her research and swearing her to secrecy under the National Security Act. The Caldwell investigation, they informed her, had been classified since 1863, when Union Army officials had first encountered Jeremiah Caldwell's work on life extension. For over a century, a small division within what would eventually become the National Institutes of Health had been monitoring scientific literature for signs of the Caldwell formula resurfacing. Dr. Chen's paper had triggered long-dormant protocols. She was offered a position within this division, not as punishment, but as recognition of her insight. The government, it seemed, had been tracking the anonymous papers for years, but had never made the connection to the original Caldwell property. Dr. Chun accepted the position, driven by scientific curiosity. What she discovered in the classified archives both fascinated and disturbed her. The government had never obtained the complete elixir formula. Their attempts to recreate it based on Jeremiah Caldwell's partial notes had resulted in compounds that extended life marginally but caused severe side effects. More troubling were the files on the Caldwell family themselves. Surveillance reports spanning decades documented their movements across the country, their periodic returns to Kentucky, their apparent agelessness. The most recent file contained photographs from 1965, showing a family that matched descriptions from a century earlier, including a child who appeared to be 6 years old but was documented as having been born in 1926. The file also mentioned a companion who had joined the family in the late 1940s, a young man who had previously been a journalist in Louisville, Thomas Reed. When Dr. Chun questioned her superiors about why the government didn't simply approach the Caldwells directly, the answer was chilling in its pragmatism. Previous attempts had resulted in the family disappearing, sometimes for decades. The current policy was observation only, in hopes that the anonymous papers would eventually reveal the complete formula. "We've been patient for over 100 years," her supervisor explained. "We can wait a bit longer." But Dr. Chun wasn't satisfied with waiting. The scientific breakthrough represented by the elixir was too significant to leave in limbo. Using the government's resources, she began her own search for Thomas Reed, believing he might be more approachable than the Caldwells themselves. It took months of careful investigation, but eventually she traced him to a small coastal town in Oregon. The bookshop was exactly as described, a charming establishment specializing in rare historical texts. The owner, who called himself Thomas Blackwood, matched Reed's description but appeared far too young to be the same man, unless, of course, he had taken the elixir. In the autumn of 1968, Dr. Chun took a leave of absence and traveled to Oregon. The bookshop's bell tinkled as she entered, the air filled with the musty scent of old paper and leather bindings. The owner, a handsome man who appeared to be in his early 30s, greeted her warmly. "How may I help you today?" he asked, his voice cultured and pleasant. Dr. Chun browsed the shelves, her fingers trailing over spines, gathering her courage. Finally, she turned to him and said quietly, "I believe you're Thomas Reed, formerly of the Louisville Courier-Journal." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," he replied smoothly. "My name is Thomas Blackwood. I've never been to Louisville." "Mr. Reed," she persisted, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm not here on behalf of the government, though I should tell you they're aware of your existence. I'm a scientist. I've been studying the anonymous papers I believe you've been submitting to medical journals." The man said nothing, his face carefully neutral. "The Caldwell family," Dr. Chun continued, stepping closer, the scent of old books enveloping them. "Their secret, the elixir. I know about all of it." For a long moment, the bookshop was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Then Thomas sighed, a sound that seemed to contain decades of weariness. "How did you find me?" he asked finally. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, "but once I understood what I was looking for, the pattern became clear." He nodded slowly, then moved to the front door, turning the sign to closed and drawing the blinds. "We should talk privately," he said, gesturing toward a back room. "This is not a conversation for public spaces." The back room was a cozy office lined with even more books, the shelves sagging under their weight, the air rich with the scent of aged leather. Thomas offered her a seat, the chair creaking under her as she sat, then poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. 21 years, he said, handing her a glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "That's how long it's been since anyone connected me to Thomas Reed. I was beginning to think I'd covered my tracks well enough." "You did," Dr. Chun assured him, "but I had resources you couldn't have anticipated." "Government resources," he said, a statement rather than a question. She nodded. "They've been watching the Caldwells for over a century. They've collected every anonymous paper you've published, but they've never made the connection between the two." "And what do they intend to do with this information?" Thomas asked, his eyes narrowing. "Nothing for now. Their policy is observation only. They've learned from past mistakes." Thomas studied her face, his expression guarded. "And what do you intend to do, Dr. Chun?" Elizabeth Chun set her glass down untouched. "I want to understand. The papers you've been publishing, they're breadcrumbs, aren't they? Pieces of the puzzle released slowly over time." He smiled faintly. "You're very perceptive, Dr. Chun. But why? If you have the complete formula, why not share it all at once? Think of the lives that could be saved, the suffering that could be prevented." Thomas leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his apparent age. "Joseph Caldwell asked me the same question in reverse. When I wanted to publish the story immediately, he asked, 'Think of the suffering that could be caused.'" He shook his head. "We were both right in our ways. So this is your compromise?" she asked, releasing the knowledge piece by piece. "Over decades, over centuries, if necessary," he corrected. "The breadcrumbs, as you call them, are carefully designed. Each advances scientific understanding incrementally without making the final leap to the elixir itself. That leap won't come until humanity is ready for it. And who are you to decide when humanity is ready?" Dr. Chun challenged. Thomas laughed softly. "I ask myself that question every day. I don't have a satisfactory answer yet. But consider the alternative, the elixir in the hands of governments, corporations, the wealthy elite. A world divided between the ageless and the mortal. Would that be better?" Dr. Chun had no immediate response. The ethical questions surrounding life extension were indeed complex, far beyond the simple scientific pursuit of knowledge. "The Caldwells," she said finally, Are they still alive? Yes, though not in Kentucky anymore. Thomas smiled at some private memory. Margaret is quite grown up now, though she still looks like a child. It's hardest for her, I think. Have you maintained contact with them? He nodded. We're careful, but yes. We've become something of an extended family over the years. And the elixir itself, is it still being produced? Thomas's expression closed off slightly. Dr. Chun, you seem like a sincere person, but I've already said more than I should. The location of the Caldwells, the current status of the elixir, these are not things I'm willing to discuss. She understood his caution, but pressed on. What if we could work together? My scientific knowledge combined with your understanding of the elixir, we could advance the research significantly. Perhaps find a way to make it safe for wider distribution. Safe? Thomas raised an eyebrow. The elixir is physically safe. It's the psychological and societal implications that concern me. Then let's study those too, she urged, controlled trials, ethical frameworks, regulatory guidelines. We could prepare the ground for an eventual release, ensure it benefits humanity broadly rather than a privileged few. Thomas regarded her thoughtfully. You're very passionate about this. I'm a scientist, she said simply. The pursuit of knowledge is my life's work. And if that knowledge could destroy more than it creates, then we contain it until we find a better solution. But doing nothing, hiding the truth entirely, that's not a solution either. Thomas was silent for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost resigned. I've lived with this secret for 21 years, he said. The Caldwells have lived with it for over a century. The burden is substantial. Sometimes I think Joseph was right, that humanity will never be ready. Other times I see the advances we've made, the potential for growth and wisdom, and I hope. Hope is essential, Dr. Chun said. Without it, why bother advancing science at all? A smile touched Thomas's lips. A fair point. He set down his glass and leaned forward. I won't give you the formula, Dr. Chun. Not yet. But I will share something else with you, a theoretical framework for understanding how the elixir affects cellular regeneration. It's more than I've shared in any of the anonymous papers. Consider it a test. A test of what? Of whether partial knowledge can be handled responsibly. Publish your findings based on what I give you. Let's see how the scientific community and the government responds. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was a start. I can work with that, she agreed. Thomas rose and moved to a hidden wall safe behind one of the bookshelves, the mechanism clicking softly as he turned the dial. From it, he withdrew a thin manuscript bound in leather. This contains observations and theories I've developed over the past 2 decades, he explained, handing it to her, the leather smooth and cool against her palm. It's incomplete by design, but it's genuine. Dr. Chun accepted the manuscript with reverence, understanding its significance. As she prepared to leave, a question occurred to her. The government files mentioned a young girl, Margaret, born in 1926, but still appearing as a child in the 1960s. How does she cope with that existence? A shadow crossed Thomas's face. With difficulty, he admitted. The elixir's greatest curse is the disconnect between appearance and experience. Margaret has the mind of a woman in her 40s trapped in a child's body. She can never have a normal life, never form relationships with people her own age. It's lonely. The human cost of extended youth suddenly became clearer to Dr. Chun. The scientific marvel of the elixir had a deeply personal impact on those who lived with its effects. Perhaps, she suggested gently, that's another area we could research, finding ways to help people like Margaret navigate their unique existence. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. He walked her to the door, the bell tinkling softly as he opened it. I'll be watching for your publication, Dr. Chen, he said, his eyes meeting hers. And I'll know if you share more than we've agreed. I understand. She extended her hand. This won't be the last time we meet, Mr. Reed. He took her hand, his grip firm despite his scholarly appearance. No, he agreed. I don't believe it will be. As Dr. Chun left the bookshop and stepped into the Oregon sunshine, She felt the weight of the manuscript in her bag and the greater weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She had sought answers and found only more questions about science, ethics, and the very nature of human existence. The elixir was both miracle and burden, gift and curse. Understanding its complexities would take more than scientific inquiry. It would require wisdom that perhaps only came with the passage of time. And time, it seemed, was something Thomas Reid had in abundance. In the decades that followed, Dr. Elizabeth Chun became a leading figure in longevity research. Her papers, building upon the theoretical framework Thomas had provided, pushed the boundaries of cellular biology and genetics. She never revealed her source, attributing her insights to previously unpublished research she had discovered. The government watched her work with interest but never intervened directly. The anonymous papers continued to appear in scientific journals, now complementing rather than preceding her own publications. And in a small Oregon coastal town, a bookshop changed hands every 20 years or so, always passing to a new owner who bore a striking resemblance to the previous one. Locals noticed the similarity but thought little of it. Just another family business passed down through generations. The secret of the Caldwells and of Thomas Reid remained hidden in plain sight, influencing the course of medical science without ever revealing itself completely. A mystery wrapped in the pages of history, waiting for the day when humanity would be wise enough to turn the final page. The years rolled on, each season blending into the next with a rhythm that Dr. Elizabeth Chun came to know intimately as she immersed herself in the study of longevity. The manuscript Thomas Reid, now Thomas Blackwood, had entrusted to her became the cornerstone of her work, its leather-bound pages worn from countless readings, the ink fading slightly under the scrutiny of her magnifying glass. The theoretical framework it contained was a treasure trove of insights, detailing the elixir's impact on cellular regeneration with a precision that hinted at decades of observation. Yet, as she had noted, it was incomplete. Deliberately so, she believed, a safeguard woven into its very structure by a man who had lived long enough to understand the consequences of reckless revelation. Back in her laboratory at the University of Kentucky Medical School, Dr. Chun assembled a team of researchers, their faces bright with the zeal of discovery, their white coats a stark contrast to the gray walls of the facility. She shared the manuscript's contents with them, framing it as a hypothesis drawn from obscure 19th century notes she had uncovered in an abandoned farmhouse. A half-truth that satisfied their curiosity without betraying Thomas's trust. The team worked tirelessly, their days filled with the hum of centrifuges and the clatter of microscopes, their nights spent poring over data that hinted at breakthroughs yet remained just out of reach. The missing pieces of the puzzle, those critical components that would turn theory into practice, eluded them as if guarded by an invisible hand. Dr. Chun published her first paper in 1970, a cautious exploration of cellular regeneration that cited the manuscript as an anonymous source. The scientific community received it with a mix of intrigue and skepticism, the journal's pages filled with letters debating its merits. Her findings suggested that telomere preservation could slow aging, a concept that was revolutionary yet lacked the empirical evidence to convince the skeptics. The government, through its covert division within the National Institutes of Health, took note, their surveillance reports growing thicker with each publication. They watched her progress with a quiet intensity, their files expanding to include her name alongside the Caldwells and Reid, but they held back, adhering to their policy of observation rather than intervention. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Dr. Chen's reputation grew, her name appearing in prestigious journals and her lectures drawing crowds of eager students and seasoned scientists alike. She moved to a larger facility in Washington, D.C., where the resources of the NIH allowed her to expand her research. The anonymous papers continued to arrive, postmarked from cities across the country: Seattle, Chicago, Miami, each one a subtle nudge forward, complementing her work without overlapping it entirely. Thomas, she suspected, was orchestrating this dance of disclosure, his movements a shadow play across the nation, always one step ahead of those who might seek him out. In 1985, a breakthrough came. Her team identified a compound that mimicked the manuscript's described effects on cellular division, extending the lifespan of lab mice by nearly 20%. The results were published with cautious optimism, the paper's conclusion noting that further research was needed to eliminate side effects, tumors that appeared in some subjects, a grim reminder of the elixir's potential dangers. The government's response was swift. A team of agents visited her lab, their suits immaculate, their faces unreadable. They congratulated her on the progress but warned her to proceed with care, their tone implying that the Caldwell case remained a classified matter. Dr. Chun nodded, her mind racing, knowing that each step forward brought her closer to the secret Thomas guarded. Meanwhile, in Oregon, Thomas Blackwood tended his bookshop with the same quiet diligence he had shown for decades. The shop had become a local fixture, its shelves a labyrinth of history and mystery, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. Customers came and went, some drawn by the rare first editions, others by the enigmatic proprietor whose youthful appearance belied his encyclopedic knowledge. He had changed the shop's name twice since 1968, each rebranding a subtle shield against recognition, but the essence remained the same, a haven for those who loved the past and a cover for his true purpose. Thomas kept his journals in a locked drawer beneath the counter, their pages filled with observations of a world in flux. He wrote of the civil rights movement, the moon landing, the rise of computers, events he witnessed with the long view the elixir had granted him. Each entry was a meditation on time, a balance between the wonder of human progress and the fear of its misuse. Every few years, he distilled these thoughts into a new anonymous paper, mailing it from a different city, his typewriters clack a rhythmic counterpoint to the shop's silence. He knew Dr. Chun was following his trail, her publications a mirror to his own, and he watched her progress with a mix of pride and caution. In 1992, a letter arrived at the bookshop, its envelope plain but the handwriting familiar. It was from Eleanor Caldwell, postmarked from a small town in Montana. The message was brief. * Margaret struggles. We move again soon. Thank you for the books. * Thomas read it twice, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Margaret, now a woman in her 60s by experience but still a child in appearance, was the heart of his concern. He had sent her books over the years, children's stories at first, then novels and histories as her mind matured, hoping to ease her isolation. The Caldwells' periodic moves were a testament to their survival, a dance of disappearance and return that had kept them safe for over a century. That autumn, Thomas traveled to Montana under the guise of a book-buying trip, his car winding through the rugged landscape until he reached a remote valley. The Caldwell farmhouse was modest, its paint fresh but its style reminiscent of Hollow Creek. Joseph greeted him on the porch, his face lined but his eyes bright, Eleanor beside him with a smile that carried the weight of years. Margaret ran out, her childish frame a stark contrast to the wisdom in her gaze, and threw her arms around him. "You came!" she exclaimed, her voice a blend of joy and relief. They spent the day together, talking of books and history, the children, Samuel and James, now appearing as young men despite their ages, joining in with stories of their latest move. Thomas returned to Oregon with a renewed sense of purpose. Margaret's struggle had crystallized his resolve. The elixir's gift was also its curse, and any solution must address both its benefits and its burdens. He wrote a new paper that year focusing on the psychological impact of extended youth and mailed it from Denver. Dr. Chun published a response in 1993, citing his work and proposing studies on mental health in long-lived populations, a nod to their unspoken collaboration. The scientific community took note, and for the first time, the government's files included a section on ethical considerations, though their surveillance remained focused on the formula itself. By the early 2000s, Dr. Chen's research had extended human lifespan in controlled trials, her team developing drugs that slowed aging by 10 to 15% with minimal side effects. The public hailed her as a pioneer, her face appearing on magazine covers, her lectures broadcast worldwide. Yet she knew the truth. The elixir's full potential remained locked away, its secret a silent partner in her success. She kept in touch with Thomas through coded letters, their correspondence a dance of trust and restraint. He sent her fragments of theory, she responded with data, and together they nudged science forward without crossing the line into revelation. In 2010, a crisis emerged. A pharmaceutical company, tipped off by a leaked NIH report, began reverse engineering Dr. Chen's work, their goal to create a commercial anti-aging drug. The government intervened, classifying her latest findings, but the damage was done. Rumors of the Caldwell elixir surfaced in tabloids, drawing attention to Hollow Creek and Oregon alike. Thomas closed his bookshop temporarily, moving to a new town in Washington state, while the Caldwells vanished once more, their Montana home abandoned. Dr. Chun faced a congressional hearing, her testimony a careful balance of science and secrecy, her resolve tested as never before. That night, she received a package at her D.C. apartment, a small box containing a vial identical to the one Thomas had shown her in 1968, accompanied by a note. *4 when the time is right. Not yet. She stared at it, the amber liquid glinting in the lamplight, and felt the weight of history in her hands. The elixir was a temptation and a responsibility, its presence a reminder of the promise she had made to Thomas, and to herself, to protect its secret until humanity was ready. The years continued their march, and by 2025, Dr. Chun had retired, her legacy a field of longevity research that had extended average lifespans by decades. She lived quietly in Virginia, her days filled with gardening and writing, her nights haunted by the vial she kept in a safe. Thomas, now in his late 70s by experience but still appearing in his 30s, operated a bookshop in Maine, his journals a testament to a century of observation. The Caldwells, wherever they were, remained a whisper in the wind, their story a legend that persisted in Kentucky folklore. One summer evening, as fireflies danced in her garden, Dr. Chun received a final letter from Thomas. "The world is closer, it read. But not close enough. Keep watching, she smiled, the vial's weight a constant companion, and knew that the secret of the ages would endure, until the day when wisdom matched the miracle it contained. The dawn of the 2030s brought a new era of scrutiny to the field of longevity research, a time when the whispers of the Caldwell elixir had grown into a persistent hum that reverberated through scientific circles and beyond. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, now in her late 70s, had stepped back from active research but remained a revered figure, her Virginia home a sanctuary where she tended roses and reviewed the progress of a world she had helped shape. The vial, locked in its safe, was a silent sentinel, its amber contents a reminder of the promise she had made to Thomas Reed decades earlier. The scientific community had advanced significantly since her early days, with her team's work on telomere preservation leading to drugs that extended human life by an average of 20 years, though the elusive goal of agelessness remained out of reach. In Maine, Thomas Blackwood continued his quiet existence, the bookshop in a coastal town now a third iteration under a new name, Blackwood's Rare Volumes. The shelves groaned under the weight of centuries-old texts, their pages yellowed and fragile, mirroring the passage of time that Thomas himself seemed to defy. His face, still marked by the smooth lines of his 30s, drew occasional comments from locals, but he dismissed them with a smile and a tale of good genes. Behind the counter, his journals grew thicker, each entry a meticulous record of a world transformed by technology and turmoil, the rise of artificial intelligence, the climate crises of the 2020s, the tentative steps toward global cooperation. Every few years, he mailed another anonymous paper, this time from Boston or Portland, each one a carefully crafted breadcrumb that advanced the science of aging without revealing the elixir's core. The Caldwells, meanwhile, had settled in a remote corner of Idaho, their latest farmhouse a blend of modern efficiency and old-world charm. Joseph and Eleanor, their appearances unchanged since Thomas first met them, tended a garden that thrived despite the arid climate, their hands steady with the wisdom of over 2 centuries. Samuel and James, now appearing as men in their 20s despite being over a century old, worked the land, their conversations laced with memories of wars and revolutions they had witnessed. Margaret, however, remained the family's quiet heart, her body still that of a 6-year-old, her mind now that of a woman in her 90s. She spent her days reading the books Thomas sent, philosophy, poetry, science, her eyes reflecting a depth that belied her form. The isolation weighed on her, a burden she shared with Thomas in rare letters, their bond a thread of understanding across the years. In 2035, a breakthrough threatened to unravel the delicate balance Thomas and Dr. Chun had maintained. A biotech firm, leveraging declassified fragments of NIH research, synthesized a compound that mimicked the elixir's effects with startling accuracy, extending the lifespan of test subjects by decades. The news broke globally, headlines screaming of an anti-aging revolution, and the public's reaction was a mix of awe and fear. Governments scrambled to regulate the technology, while black markets emerged, offering the drug to the wealthy at exorbitant prices. Dr. Chun watched from her Virginia porch, the vial's presence a heavy counterpoint to the chaos unfolding on her television screen. She wrote to Thomas, her handwriting shaky but resolute. *, they're close. We must act. Thomas responded with a visit, arriving at her home under the cover of a stormy night in October 2035. The rain lashed against the windows as he sat across from her, the safe's key glinting on the table between them. "They've taken our work and twisted it," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of a century. "The side effects, tumors, neurological decline, are worse than anything we feared." Dr. Chun nodded, her eyes fixed on the key. "We need to guide them, Thomas, not just observe. The ethical framework we discussed. It's more urgent now." He hesitated. The long view, the elixir had given him warring with the immediacy of the crisis. Finally, he agreed. "I'll give you another piece, the process for stabilizing the compound. But it's still incomplete. They must earn the rest." The next year, Dr. Chun published a paper under a pseudonym, detailing a stabilization technique that reduced the biotech firm's side effects by 70%. The scientific community hailed it as a leap forward, but the government's response was swift. Agents visited her again, their questions probing, their files updated with new urgency. She maintained her cover story, citing an anonymous collaborator, and the investigation stalled, though the pressure mounted. Thomas, meanwhile, moved his bookshop to Nova Scotia, the change a precaution against the growing interest in his identity. His latest paper, mailed from Halifax, focused on the psychological toll of extended life, a subtle warning to those racing toward immortality. By 2040, the world had adapted to the new reality of extended lifespans, with the stabilized compound available to a select few under strict regulation. The wealthy elite flaunted their youth, their faces smooth while the poor aged as ever, widening the gap Thomas and Dr. Chun had long feared. Margaret's letters grew sparser, her words hinting at a decision to retreat further, perhaps to a life of complete seclusion. Joseph and Eleanor supported her, their own resolve tested by the world's gaze turning toward their legend. Thomas sent a package to Idaho, books on meditation and resilience, hoping to ease her burden, but the return address was a dead end, the Caldwell's next move a mystery even to him. The council, now led by Dr. Patel, continued her work, their papers a steady drip of knowledge. Thomas attended her funeral in secret, his youthful face hidden among the crowd, a single rose left at her grave, a silent tribute to their partnership. The vial remained locked, its contents a promise deferred, as the world grappled with the partial gifts it had already received. In 2060, a global summit on longevity was convened, the first to address the ethical implications head-on. Dr. Patel presented the council's findings, calling for a moratorium on further anti-aging research until societal structures could support it. The summit ended in compromise, a 10-year pause, during which education and equity programs would be developed. Thomas watched from afar, his journal noting the event with cautious optimism. Margaret, now nearing her 130s in experience, wrote to him from an undisclosed location, her letter a plea. When will it be enough? He had no answer, only the resolve to keep waiting. The decade passed, and by 2070 the world had changed. Education campaigns had raised awareness, wealth redistribution schemes had narrowed the gap, and mental health support for the long-lived had emerged. Dr. Patel, now in her 60s, approached Thomas in Newfoundland, her research having traced him at last. "It's time," she said, her eyes meeting his with a scientist's certainty. Thomas opened his safe, revealing a journal, not the formula, but a detailed account of the elixir's creation and effects, compiled from his memories and the Caldwell stories. "Give them this," he said. "Let them decide." The journal was published in 2071, its revelations sparking a global debate. Scientists raced to recreate the elixir, governments imposed strict controls, and the public demanded access. The Caldwells, contacted through a coded message, emerged briefly, their faces broadcast to a stunned world, Joseph and Eleanor as they had always been, Margaret a child with the wisdom of centuries. They spoke of their lives, their losses, their hope, and then retreated, their secret no longer theirs alone. Thomas, his role exposed, closed his shop and vanished, his final journal entry a reflection. Asterisk, the gift is given. The burden remains. Asterisk. By 2080, the elixir was replicated, its distribution managed by a global council inspired by Dr. Chen's vision. Side effects were minimized, mental health support integrated, and access granted equitably. The world aged differently, its people living longer but not forever, the balance Thomas and Dr. Chen had sought finally achieved. In a quiet corner of the world, perhaps Newfoundland or beyond, Thomas Reed watched, his face still young, his eyes ancient, waiting for the next chapter in humanity's story. The year 2080 marked a turning point in human history, a moment when the elixir, once a whispered legend of the Caldwell family, became a tangible reality woven into the fabric of society. The Global Council, established in the wake of Dr. Elizabeth Chen's vision and refined under Dr. Aisha Patel's leadership, had spent the previous decade perfecting its distribution and oversight. The elixir, now replicated with precision from the journal Thomas Reed had provided, was administered under strict protocols, available to all, yet regulated to prevent the inequalities that had haunted its early promise. Clinics sprang up worldwide, their sterile white rooms filled with the hum of medical equipment and the quiet hope of patients seeking a longer life. The side effects, once a grim specter of tumors and mental decline, had been mitigated through genetic screening and psychological support, a testament to the council's foresight. In Newfoundland, Thomas Reed, still bearing the youthful visage of his 30s, watched the world transform from the shadows of his latest refuge, a small cabin nestled among the rugged cliffs. The bookshop, Reed's Antiquities, had been left behind, its shelves emptied and its sign removed, a silent farewell to a life of concealment. His journals, now spanning over a century, filled a locked chest, their pages a chronicle of humanity's journey from the post-war chaos of 1947 to this new era of extended life. He wrote less frequently, his pen pausing over the paper as he reflected on the long view the elixir had granted him. A perspective that saw decades as mere chapters, each ending with both triumph and tragedy. The Caldwells, having emerged briefly in 2071, had retreated once more, their Idaho home abandoned for a new sanctuary in the Canadian Rockies. Joseph and Eleanor, their faces unchanged by time, tended a garden that flourished with alpine flowers, their hands steady with the muscle memory of centuries. Samuel and James, appearing as men in their prime, had taken to guiding the council on the elixir's practical implications, their voices carrying the weight of experience in closed-door meetings. Margaret, however, remained the family's enigma. Her childlike form, frozen since 1926, housed a mind that had witnessed the 20th and 21st centuries, her letters to Thomas filled with a poignant mix of wisdom and longing. She had chosen to stay with her family, her isolation a chosen solitude, mitigated by the books and correspondence that connected her to the world. The elixir's impact was profound yet uneven. By 2085, the global average lifespan had climbed to 120 years, with many living well into their 150s without the frailty of old age. Cities adapted, their architecture stretching upward to accommodate growing populations, their parks filled with generations mingling in ways unseen before. Education systems evolved, offering lifelong learning to minds that remained sharp for decades, while mental health programs addressed the emotional toll of outliving loved ones, a challenge Thomas had foreseen and the council had prioritized. Yet, challenges persisted. Some nations resisted the elixir, citing religious or cultural objections, their borders a patchwork of ageless and aging societies. Black markets, though diminished, still thrived, offering unregulated doses to those willing to risk the consequences. Dr. Patel, now in her 90s but appearing in her 40s thanks to the elixir she had taken under council approval, led the effort to refine its application. Her research focused on tailoring the elixir to individual genetics, reducing residual side effects and ensuring its benefits reached the most vulnerable. In 2087, she published a landmark study, demonstrating that the elixir could be adjusted to halt aging at different life stages, offering a choice between eternal youth and a gradual decline, a compromise that honored the diversity of human experience. The council adopted her findings, and by 2090, the world saw its first generation of chosen agers, individuals who opted to age naturally after a century, their deaths a deliberate act of closure. Thomas, observing from his cabin, felt a stir of hope. He wrote to Margaret, suggesting she consider this option, her response a thoughtful refusal. *, I've lived too long as a child. I'll wait for the end my family chooses. *, her words haunted him, a reminder of the elixir's curse that even science could not fully heal. He traveled to the Rockies that summer, his first visit in years, the journey a pilgrimage to reconnect with the family that had shaped his destiny. The Caldwell home was a haven of quiet strength, the air scented with pine and the faint tang of wood smoke. Joseph greeted him with a firm handshake, Eleanor with a warm embrace, and Margaret with a smile that carried the weight of centuries. They spent days together, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future, the bond between them a lifeline across time. The 2090s brought a new challenge, a movement calling for the elixir's universal mandate, arguing that choice itself was a privilege of the educated elite. Protests erupted in major cities, their banners demanding equality in immortality, while counter-demonstrations defended personal freedom. The council, under Dr. Patel's guidance, convened a global referendum in 2095. The results a narrow vote to maintain the opt-in system, with funds allocated to ensure access for all. Thomas, watching the debates on a satellite feed, penned a paper advocating for education over enforcement, mailing it from a post office in St. John's. Dr. Patel incorporated his insights, her response a policy paper that stabilized the council's position. By 2100, the world had settled into a new equilibrium. The elixir was a cornerstone of society, its administration a ritual of consent and care, its effects a blend of science and humanity's enduring spirit. Thomas, now over 150 years old by experience, felt the weight of his decision in 1947 more acutely. He had drunk the elixir to protect the Caldwells, to seek a middle path, and now he saw the fruits of that choice. A world neither utopia nor dystopia, but a complex tapestry of life extended. He wrote his final journal entry, a reflection on the balance between revelation and restraint, and sealed it in his chest, leaving it for future generations to find. In the Rockies, the Caldwells faced their own reckoning. Joseph and Eleanor, after consulting with Samuel, James, and Margaret, chose to age naturally, their bodies beginning a slow decline in 2102. Margaret, after much deliberation, followed suit, her childlike form aging for the first time in nearly 2 centuries, a process she documented in a memoir published anonymously. The Long Childhood Asterisk, a bestseller that moved millions. The family gathered for a final winter, their home filled with laughter and tears, their legacy a testament to resilience. Thomas visited one last time in 2105, the snow blanketing the Rockies a mirror to the winter of 1871 Utah he had once imagined. Joseph, now appearing in his 60s, welcomed him with a smile, Eleanor with a nod, and Margaret, her face lined but radiant, with a hug. They spoke of the past, of Hollow Creek, of Dr. Chun, of the world they had shaped, and of the future they would not see. As Thomas left, Joseph pressed a small vial into his hand, its amber liquid a duplicate of the original. "For when you're ready," he said, his voice weak but certain. Thomas nodded, tucking it into his coat, the weight a new chapter. The Caldwells passed in 2107, their deaths peaceful, their story etched into history. Thomas returned to Newfoundland, his cabin a quiet retreat, the vial a constant companion. He lived on, his journals a legacy, his role as guardian fading as the world grew wise enough to carry the elixir's burden. In 2125, on the 200th anniversary of his journey to Hollow Creek, he opened the vial, the liquid bitter and familiar, and drank, choosing to age with the world he had helped create. His death came in 2130, at the age of 205, his face marked by time, his eyes at peace. In the archives of the Kentucky Historical Society, the 1947 photograph remained, its caption unchanged, * unidentified family, Hollow Creek, Kentucky, 1947, photographer unknown. * but a new note had been added, penned by an anonymous donor. The secret is no longer ours alone. The mystery endured, a whisper in the wind, its influence a quiet force shaping a world that had learned to live with eternity. The year 2130 marked the end of an era, a quiet close to the life of Thomas Reed, whose journey from a young journalist in 1947 to a guardian of humanity's longest secret had spanned nearly 2 centuries. His death, a deliberate choice to age and pass with the world he had helped shape, was a private affair. His cabin in Newfoundland left to the elements, the chest of journals buried beneath the floorboards for a future generation to uncover. The amber vial, its contents consumed, lay empty on his table, a symbol of the promise fulfilled and the burden released. The Global Council, now led by Dr. Aisha Patel's successor, Dr. Liam Gwynn, noted his passing with a discreet tribute in their records, acknowledging the anonymous contributor whose papers had guided their work. The world, however, moved on, its people living longer, its societies adapting to the elixir's legacy. In the decades that followed, the elixir became a cornerstone of human existence, its administration a ritual as commonplace as vaccinations had once been. By 2150, the global lifespan averaged 140 years, with many choosing to extend into their 180s or beyond, guided by the opt-in system Dr. Patel had championed. The Council's ethical framework ensured equitable access, with subsidies for developing nations and mental health programs addressing the long view syndrome, the heightened awareness of time's passage that Thomas had first experienced. Cities evolved into sprawling metropolises, their skyscrapers pierced by green terraces, their streets alive with generations from toddlers to centenarians, each face a testament to the elixir's reach. The Caldwell's legacy endured in memory and myth. Their memoir, The Long Childhood, remained a bestseller, its pages read by scholars and dreamers alike, its anonymous author a figure of fascination. The Canadian Rockies, where they had spent their final years, became a pilgrimage site, its trails marked by plaques commemorating their contribution to humanity's longevity. Samuel and James, having passed with their parents in 2107, were remembered as advisors to the Council, their insights shaping its early policies. Margaret's choice to age naturally after centuries as a child inspired a movement for life-stage autonomy, a philosophy that encouraged individuals to define their own timelines, a ripple effect of her story. Dr. Gwynn, a geneticist in his apparent 40s, despite his 120 years, led the Council into the 2160s with a focus on refining the elixir's effects. His research identified a gene sequence that allowed for reversible aging, enabling individuals to pause or resume the process at will, a breakthrough that addressed Margaret's struggle and offered flexibility to future generations. The 2170 summit adopted this innovation, and by 2180, the world saw its first phase shifters, people who toggled between youth and maturity, their lives a dance with time. The Council documented these changes, their archives a digital vault of human evolution, accessible to all but guarded by strict ethical codes. Thomas's journals, discovered in 2145 by a hiker exploring the Newfoundland coast, became a cultural treasure. Published as The Long View, they revealed his journey from Hollow Creek to the elixir's global impact, his identity as Thomas Reed confirmed by cross-referencing with Dr. Chen's notes, donated to the Council by Dr. Patel. The book sparked a renaissance of historical study, its pages offering a first-hand account of the 20th and 21st centuries, filtered through the lens of immortality. Scholars debated his motives, his ethics, his partnership with the Caldwells, but all agreed on his role as a bridge between secrecy and revelation. In 2200, on the 253rd anniversary of Thomas's visit to Hollow Creek, the Kentucky Historical Society held a centennial exhibition, The Caldwell Enigma. The 1947 photograph was its centerpiece, its sixth figure. Thomas with his camera, now identified, his expression a blend of wonder and resolve. new artifacts emerged. A letter from Eleanor to Thomas, found in a Montana attic, and a fragment of Jeremiah Caldwell's original notes, unearthed in an Ohio archive. The exhibition drew millions, its narrative a blend of fact and folklore, its conclusion open-ended. The elixir's full story remained a mystery, its wisdom a gift humanity continued to earn. The world of 2250 reflected this legacy. Lifespans stretched to 200 years for many, with phase shifting a norm, yet mortality remained a choice, a balance Thomas and Dr. Chun had envisioned. The Council, now a global institution, oversaw a society where resources were shared, education lifelong, and mental health a priority, a utopia tempered by the lessons of the past. In remote corners, tales of the Caldwells persisted, their agelessness a legend whispered by children, their sacrifice a foundation for the present. Dr. Nguyen, retiring in 2260 at the age of 240, left a final address. "We stand on the shoulders of those who waited, Thomas, the Caldwells, Dr. Chun. The elixir is not our triumph, but our responsibility." His successor, Dr. Mei Lin, continued the stewardship, her research exploring the elixir's potential to heal genetic diseases, a new frontier of hope. In Newfoundland, a monument rose near Thomas's cabin site, a simple stone with his initials and the years 1925 to 2130, its plaque reading, "He gave us time." By 2300, the elixir's story had woven into the tapestry of human culture, its origins a distant echo, its impact a living reality. The Kentucky Historical Society's archives, now a digital galaxy, preserved the photograph, the letters, the journals, fragments of a secret that had shaped the ages. Children learned of the Caldwells in schools, their tale a parable of endurance, while scientists built on Dr. Lin's work, extending life's quality rather than its length. The world aged differently, its people wise with time, its future a promise kept by those who had waited for humanity to be ready. And somewhere, perhaps in the wind over the Rockies or the waves off Newfoundland, the spirit of the elixir lingered, a whisper of eternity, a gift balanced by the burden of its keepers, a mystery resolved yet ever unfolding. Children learned of the Caldwells in schools, their tale a parable of endurance, while scientists built on Dr. Lin's work, extending life's quality rather than its length. The world aged differently, its people wise with time, its future a promise kept by those who had waited for humanity to be ready. And somewhere, perhaps in the wind over the Rockies or the waves off Newfoundland, the spirit of the elixir lingered, a whisper of eternity, a gift balanced by the burden of its keepers, a mystery resolved yet ever unfolding.